Życzymy Państwu przyjemnej podróży.
Dobry wieczór. Witamy Państwa na panelu
Good
Kreatywne Miasto,
This
które
panel
mam przyjemność
discussion is
poprowadzić,
about the
reprezentując
creative
instytucję
cities.
kultury
I represent
21,
in Los
mieszczącą się w
21
zrewitalizowanej
institution in
kamienicy
revitalized
Hilarego
tenement
Majewskiego,
house
dawnego architekta
by Hilary Majewski,
Mówię o tym,
former
ponieważ
architect of
to,
the
że się tam
city.
znajdujemy, łączy się z
I
strategią
mention it
miasta,
because it's part
czyli
of the
rewitalizacją zdegradowanych
revitalization strategy of our
Dzisiaj też
city,
będziemy mówić o
how to
rewitalizacji i
revitalize our old buildings. And today we are going to talk about the creative city, and Charles Landry, our guest, is behind this concept, and he will be the first to take the floor. Charles is going to introduce the topic that we are going to discuss today. We also have Karolina Pietyra from the festival office from Warsaw, director Karolina. Adam Pustelnik, deputy mayor of the city of Łódź, welcome. And Charles Landry, the expert on the strategy of city policy, welcome. Charles, you will be the first to take the floor. Over to you, please.
I can tell you something, and it's not a lie. I am really pleased to be in Łódź. I've been trying to get to Łódź for 35 years. Anyway, I'm here, so I just thought I'd tell you that. Anyway, the creative city. Okay, let's look at its past, its present, its future. Obviously, any city that's ambitious and interesting is thinking about the future in various ways. And what particularly cities are trying to do is blend nature into the city so that not everything is concrete. You know all of that. That is probably the livability agenda. Now, there have always been creative cities. This is Siena. Siena invented accounting, just as an example, the way we do our finances. It invented many other things. So I'm just saying we're not the first people to think about being creative. But creativity matters in terms of its context. In the 19th century, discovering how you solve cholera was an inventive act. However, today, the problems are different. And the novelty was that about 30 years ago, people self-consciously said, how can I become a creative city? They didn't use these words 50 or 100 years ago, although they were doing things that were obviously imaginative. Now, why? Why is this such a big agenda, and even more a bigger agenda than before? Now, you know the origins. 30 years ago, everything was going downwards. The world was restructuring. Economies were moving towards China and the East, etc. And then places like Manufactura obviously declined. I don't need to tell you that. But in Britain, many places all over Europe. So these were one of the initial contexts. But one of the things that initially triggered this was the arts. And the funny thing about the arts, it had two things. One, when you looked at the different elements together, dance, music, performance, design, etc., you suddenly saw it was a massive sector. It was one of the biggest sectors and the fastest growing sectors, certainly in Europe. And one of the main reasons people found it interesting, of course, it was about identity as well, and who we are, what we can be, and people drew strength from that. Now, the core idea of the creative city is really an empowering idea. It's essentially saying that ordinary people, we're all ordinary, can make the extraordinary happen if given a chance. But you have to create the conditions that that is possible. So the central theme of the creative city is, how do you create the conditions for people to think, plan, and act with imagination, to solve problems and create opportunities? They could be in arts, they could be in wider economic areas, they could be in AI, they could be in anything. So it's the main point is an enabling environment. And how do you do that? Now, the key question that I concluded, at least, and I know you all know this, was culture is who we are, and creativity helps us, helps shape what we can become. So they're intrinsically connected, because culture, of course, is about the identity of a place. And if you feel trapped, you don't have the same vision and ambition than if you feel confident, and so on. So many people all over the world woke up to these ideas, and the big issue that they focused on or asked themselves as we move through time is, now everything is so fragile, things are falling apart. I don't need to mention the big problems in the world. And it feels to some extent that if it is 1 minute towards midnight, if we don't actually deal with some of the problems. So the earth hurts, you know, sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold, sometimes there are floods, sometimes there are this. We're experiencing it daily. So the earth hurts. And I think more and more people, and people who make decisions in cities like Adam, realize that the business as usual approach will not get us to where we need to be, because we have an economic order and way of life that is materially expansive, socially divisive, and environmentally hostile. So this is a wonderful challenge, always half glass full. I know it's horrible, but nevertheless, there is potential to deal with this with innovations and imagination. Because there is a deep yearning, I feel, I don't know if you feel, to actually make the world a better place. That sounds like a cliche, but when you talk to people, there's that yearning. I love the word yearning, yearning to make the world a better place. Yet, even though that's the case, and even though we know our environmental footprint is too big, and even though we know that the hydrogen economy could be there and fossil fuels should perhaps disappear slowly, even though that, we don't perhaps do enough. But artistic projects are often really helpful. This is Olafur Eliasson's Melting Ice from the ice Nordic Greenland in Paris in this case. And when you then suddenly see that melting, you realize it's all true about the melting ice. Or this was the Global Marine Conference. I know it's horrible, but I thought it was amazing when in the Marine Conference they said the fish hurt. The fish really hurt as they're eating all these plastics. I'm just using these as examples. Or this guy from Malaysia, Ben Von Ong, who lives in Canada, which is the plastic tap. Anyway, these are just expressions of showing and getting people to focus on what really matters. It could also be, like here in Lisbon, tolerance and diversity and all of that. And one of the things I always find interesting is looking at graffiti. This again is in Lisbon, and it says wasted youth, and there's this And then I saw this in a lift, and it says, can you open doors for me? And then suddenly the doors open. But anyway, the point is, unless we actually, because everything we're talking about is not only about people like me, it's about all the younger people who are perhaps in this room and so on. So the big breakthroughs we all know are to do with digitizing worlds, which is all immersive, which is good and bad. And we, of course, know that AI raises another issue, again, good and bad, and so on. And one of the major issues is trust. And this is such a pity because I developed a Biennale of Trust in Lviv, but of course then the pandemic came and, all of that other stuff. But that is one of the major challenges for any city decision maker, to re-establish that trust through various projects. So we do need a plan B, whatever that plan B is, and it is linking the local challenges to the global. And I think if we do that, and if cities do that, and if they actually have that bigger picture purpose, they don't say only me, but say us, we. I think that actually makes citizens and younger people in particular more engaged. So like here's an exhibition in Australia which says Beyond the Self. And sometimes you could say, let's take Łódź. Łódź should less say, I'm the most creative city in Poland, but I am the most creative city for the world, rather than in, but for. And that spirit of generosity, I am convinced, will attract people to the city because you've got a bigger purpose of some sort. So the task, everybody, I feel we have in front of us is how do you develop a comprehensive culture of creativity? Creativity in the economy, creativity in culture, creativity in social affairs, creativity in transport planning, etc., etc. And also thinking about bureaucratic creativity, my obsession. I run a festival in Berlin called the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. How can they be creative? Very interesting, and they are. And so the great transition that we're going through, and Łódź is, as everyone else, is actually a psychological problem. This is Sigmund Freud's couch. Anyway, I'm not saying we all go to the psychotherapist, but what that great transition is also about is that other invisible hand. And I believe that the great transition we're going through is a cultural problem because it's about values, behaviors, attitudes, all of those things that you all know about. And therefore, to end, there are nevertheless some dilemmas. And I saw these dilemmas today in Łódź. We all have these dilemmas. We want to be all of this. This is Mannheim. We want to be integrated, cultural, architecturally interesting, economically vital. We want participation. We want wonderful development, etc., etc. And then you have this problem. This is in Zurich. The area which is all hip, whether it is hip is a different question. Anyway, they put a hotel called the Renaissance Hotel there, and then one artist says, you can't knock down my building. Resistance in the same picture. So Renaissance and resistance. This is the classic dilemma. So, for example, Manufactura doing that is a fantastic project. Of course it raises prices. Of course it does. Anything like that does. But it also weakens, I think, Piotrkowska Street, going down it, I felt, you either need more footfall for the city as a whole. So these are sort of dilemmas that we need to deal with through interesting incentives and regulations. So rethinking incentives and regulations is one aspect of the creative city. And most importantly, it's getting out of one's own box, bringing stakeholders together, bringing different departments together to collectively look at things. So I think a creative bureaucracy is possible. And can you measure creativity? Yes, but we can discuss that later. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Dziękujemy Charlesowi za wstęp.
Thank you so much for this introduction. Charles, let me start by asking you a question. You said you wanted to come to Łódź, and you've been thinking about this for a long time, for a decade. What are your first impressions about Łódź and in the way you saw it today?
Well, there's also the impressions I had before I came, because cities are images. When people go to New York for the first time, they think I've already been there 20 times because they've seen it in films and everything else. So I, for a long, long, long time ago, knew about the film school, Vida, Polanski, etc., etc. I knew that you were one of the first places in the world to have a modern contemporary art gallery, which you wouldn't think. You would think that would be London, Rome, Paris, or something like that. I knew that. I knew about the intention to be quite ambitious. I knew you were called the Manchester of the East or Poland, etc., etc. So I had these images in my mind already, filmic pictures of factories and, I don't know, Andrzej Wajda doing funny things or so. I had these images. So that was one part. When I saw it today, it was actually better. It was even better than my images because there was some real substance and sort of, obviously there was wealth at some point, and obviously, you know, the workers were probably very poor and, you know, the factory owners were probably quite well off. But I felt it really had substance. And the other thing I felt is it seemed to be very ambitious. You could feel the ambition. And I have to say, your public space management is brilliant. There are so many small spaces, they're just small things. So whoever your urban designers are, they're pretty good. Just tiny things, you know, softening spaces. And that really, you know, the city is often far too hard. It's too hard, it's concrete, it's bricks. But you've really managed to soften it in so many places. And I thought that was wonderful. So that was actually my big insight.
Thank you. Let me now turn to director, to Karolina. The Krakow Festival Studio, from the moment it was created, transformed its character completely. You extended your interests, you developed tourism, creative business, education. What factors contributed to those decisions, and how do you deal with such a broad scope of activity? Well, I believe we did change, and at the same time we remained the same, because since the institution was created, we had this one task to celebrate and sustain the image of being a creative capital of culture. So, if you know well, the process of selecting this new capital of culture just ended. So, our congratulations to Lublin now. But this was a tool to transform the city. So from that perspective, our institution has not changed over the years. What has changed is the direction in which we are transforming the city and the measures, the tools we use to support the development of Krakow. What we managed to do is we said goodbye to tourism in some extent. Well, we do not do any direct projects dealing with tourism. We just simply co-create some touristic projects, because this is responsible for major part of Krakow's GDP. And today, we have many different tasks, and we try to juggle with those tasks. So on the one hand, we have a diversity of festivals, literature, music, film festivals. So this is a continuum. For instance, we are a theater city, a UNESCO theater city, or we also have Krakow Film Commission. So certain actions are of permanent nature. We want to be inclusive, we want to be available, and we do a lot of things, a lot of effort to become that. But we also concentrate on city, on public space. We want to create, for instance, creative space in Wesoła district. So we juggle with all those projects in order to do what we have always been doing to develop the city. And I would like to refer to what Charles mentioned a moment ago. We try to offer Krakow's inhabitants or creators that live or visit Krakow to give them competencies to create the future. So we understand that what it takes for a big, successful city as Krakow to strive is to look into the future, but not just in an artistic way, which is inspiring, but to equip the inhabitants and creators in specific tools, so that creativity can be based on such tools that are used every day and which make us innovative as a city. So this is culture, creativity, things that we are working on when we develop the human capital of Krakow inhabitants. Okay, thank you. Well, you used the word tools a number of times. Culture as a tool, creativity as a core. Well, now I'm turning to Adam. Mr. Mayor, what is it like to be responsible for economic development, for developing infrastructure and for attracting new investments to Łódź? What do you think about such tools, given all the responsibility that you have? Well, good evening, first of all.
It's really great to have you here. I wanted to meet you for a long time, so I don't know why you waited for a decade to come here. Maybe the lack of Ryanair connections, but we signed a new agreement, so we will have a chance to visit us regularly. It's great to have you here. Dobry wieczór Państwu.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Moja optyka jest z definicji spaczona.
My perspective is by definition, it's wicked, it's crooked. I have a very pragmatic view at the city perspective. A city as a creature, as a creation, whether it's located in Japan or Kamchatka or Tora Bora, a city, a town is something that has identity. And it focuses on living. So a city needs to be pulsing with life. So when I look at different sets of public policies, whether I can influence them or not, I look at policies from the perspective of movement, life, and energy that they generate. So the adjective in the title of this session is creative. And creative is an adjective that is very popular. Everything has to be creative. Business needs to be creative. Any course that people develop is supposed to be creative. Well, from the perspective of a city, I would say creativity is something that has a concept that is unique. So I have the honor to co-manage a city such as Łódź, which is not an easy task. The greatest advantage of this job and the seductive part of that job is that despite the fact that Łódź is imperfect, it's still unique. It's flexible. There is a lot of plasticity. It offers many opportunities which don't happen elsewhere. So creativity, culture, and many things that fit within that ecosystem they can be found. And I treat them, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe not, I don't know. You can navigate me, you or Charles. Well, we have certain tools to stimulate life in the city, to attract, to have a magnetic influence on others. This is a prerequisite to create a good town, and these factors are inseparable from any city and its life. So the city fully fits in the definitions that I want for Łódź. So I want to be a very life-intense, unique place. Is Łódź such a place already? I don't know, but this is the direction that we want to follow.
pewnością. Dokładnie.
That's what they pay me for, to sound good.
Do you want me to respond to what you said?
Why not?
She's the boss.
She's the boss. You're the boss. You continue.
Tak, właśnie zaraz,
It's okay.
Okay.
oddam ci głos.
I will give you the floor in a moment, Charles. But what you said
Jest, jest dobrą definicją.
what you just mentioned is a good definition of contemporary cities. They are living creatures. They have a lot of plasticity, and yes, Łódź is a good example of that. We can observe it in everyday life, and I think this also refers to the concept of a creative city. Charles, you wrote about the fact that in the future a concept of a learning city will become a greater metaphor than the concept of a creative city. Would you elaborate on your thought?
Well, firstly, obviously, the word creativity has been overused, and therefore the danger is that it becomes meaningless. And when I had the idea of the creative bureaucracy, which in one sentence is, not every person working in the public administration is stupid. There are many interesting people. They are often trapped by systems that may not be relevant. So that's what the core idea is. But I said to myself at the time, this is the last time I'm going to use the word creative, simply because it has being to use too much. So I'm always trying to find other words like inventive or imaginative, etc. In terms of the learning thing, what you were talking about, both of you have been talking about development and what learning is. What is learning? Self-reflecting, getting feedback for yourself, trying to be better, trying to improve, and so on. So I feel that learning is a sort of like an engine. It's, I think two things are an engine. Ambition. I tend to use the word ambition rather than vision, because I think ambition is an energy which drives you. You may then have a vision. I think learning is a process that means you're awake. And if you're awake, that's better than being, well, sorry, at the night, it's good to be asleep, perhaps. But you know what I'm saying. And what that would imply would be that one has a sort of culture, let's say, for example, in Łódź, let's call it a discussion culture, well, we're discussing things today. More of these things where you're bringing lots of partners together and talking about things, because what we want in a city, you said about vibrancy and vitality, quite often we think that's just conviviality and we're all getting together and it's all good fun and we're all happy. But it's not like that, because there's continual conflict. And it's interesting, I'm sorry to be pedantic, the difference between conviviality and convivencia, which is the Portuguese version. Conviviality is all a bit cozy and we're all friendly. Convivencia in Portuguese means it's like the family. I do love you, but sometimes you're a pain in the neck. It's like the Christmas party where you have the aunt and the uncle. You do love them, but really, my God, can you stop? So that's what the city is more like. And it's, I believe, a continual negotiation about difference. And that's why learning contexts, or contexts where people can have a conversation in a space which is not aggressive, is, to me, really important, which comes back to that point I talked about, trust. And, I'm not a bureaucrat, by the way, and it's so bizarre that I've got this obsession about bureaucracy. But I've really felt that people who work in the public administration, so many of them are really interesting, and the outside world has an image of them, which I think is sometimes so blinkered and just simply, I'm using a strong word now, ignorant. And that's what I feel. That's what I think I'm talking about, just breaking these barriers down, just so we can focus on what we share rather than what divides us. Sorry, I was just on some monologue, I'm sorry.
To właśnie kreatywność.
Yes, this is creativity, actually.
wyzwaniach, jakie
So
w
now
takim
a few
razie
words
stoją
about
przed,
challenges
kreatywnymi miastami,
that are faced
czy
by
uczącymi się
creative
miastami.
cities
Jeżeli
or
dzisiaj słowo
learning
kreatywne,
cities. If the word
jest
creative
nadużywane, to
is
może
a
tak
buzzword
skupmy się
now,
na
and
tych uczących się
let
miastach.
us
Jakie
focus
według
on
was
learning,
wyzwania
self-learning cities.
stoją przed Łodzią, Krakowem,
What are
czy
challenges
Karoliną?
faced by Łódź, by Krakow, Karolina?
Wyzwania kreatywnego miasta.
Challenges faced by a creative city.
Kraków poza
Kraków
tym, że jest kulturalnym bardzo
is
miastem, w sensie
a
takim z
city
bogatą ofertą
where
kulturalną, to na
culture
pewno
is vibrant.
jest też
We have a great
naukowym z licznymi
creative
uniwersytetami.
offer. We have a lot of universities as well.
I tak jak wspominałam,
So this is an
już,
academic
jakby
hub
mamy
as
taką
well.
dużą potrzebę pracy międzysektorowej,
And we need
która w
intersectoral cooperation in Krakow,
nie była na tym poziomie, który
which used to be at the level that was not satisfactory for us to feel that we are a family, and like Charles mentions, that there are no barriers and we can coexist together. And our institution tries to facilitate this dialogue and cooperation between different sectors to promote creative thinking and innovative thinking, and then we can think about common future in our city. And as a city we realize that there are a number of challenges that the world is facing: climate change, sustainable development and other challenges. And I represent the sector of culture. So last year I encouraged our city to involve in the project of sustainable development of tourism in the city, because we are dealing with over-tourism in Krakow, and basically culture also generates this phenomenon, because we offer wonderful cultural offers, so a lot of people want to see our exhibitions and our town and our cultural heritage and architectural heritage. So this is a long-term project. We want to learn what are our real challenges, intersectoral challenges, not within one sector. So research, we collect data to analyze the situation and then offer an innovative solution which is going to be efficient, and our residents have to be at the center of our activities, and micro-sectoral initiatives are going to be implemented which are good for the city and not only for tourists.
Dziękuję. To zatrzymamy się na Łodzi teraz.
Łódź
Jakie
now.
wyzwania stoją przed Łodzią jako
What are the
kreatywnym,
challenges
uczącym się
faced
miastem?
by Łódź as a creative and learning city?
Proszę pani, tych wyzwań jest tak dużo.
There are
że
so many
musiało
challenges
każdy
that
z nich
if I
musimy
wanted
siedzieć
to mention all of them,
do rana.
we would have to be here
Wyzwań
until
systemowych i
the
takich
morning.
strukturalnych Łódź ma dużo.
Apart from systemic challenges, we have other challenges as well. Do we have Artur Urbański with us?
On kiedyś ukuł takie stwierdzenie
He
inspirujące, ale bardzo
used to
ciekawe.
say that it's inspiring but very
zacząłem pełnić tę
interesting
funkcję,
before I became
ale
deputy
on
mayor.
Gdzieś kiedyś powiedział czy napisał,
And he said or
że w
wrote
latach
it
90.
that in the 90s, after the fall of the communism and monoculture, which was the only fundamental for this city.
Jak to ładnie ująłeś?
How did you put it?
Ustały przyczyny, dla których Łódź
The
powstała.
reasons for Łódź's
I moim
existence
zdaniem,
disappeared.
Moim zdaniem to była bardzo brutalna, ale
It was brutal,
to był bardzo trafny opis
but very
rzeczywistości.
precise description of Łódź reality. What do I mean
Samo to
in
zdanie
this context?
pokazuje,
This sentence
jaka jest skala wyzwań w takim punkcie.
shows
Oczywiście
the
teraz wiele
scale
rzeczy udało
of
się,
challenges.
wiele
A
rzeczy się
lot
nie udało,
has been
natomiast
done. There were a lot of
ja pozwolę się
failures
nie
as
zgodzić
well.
z niektórymi
But I would like to
stwierdzeniami, które moim
disagree
zdaniem
with some of the
właściwie sugestiami,
statements
które mają
or
charakter
suggestions
ideologiczny.
that are ideological, I would
O
say.
sformułowaniach zrównoważony rozwój, zrównoważona
Sustainable
turystyka jest
development, sustainable tourism,
jak echo sustainability.
sustainability that has become a buzzword, and we raise this issue at every conference.
Pewne procesy czy rozwój
And certain
ma też
processes,
swoją ciemną stronę, że
developments
być może
have
rosnące nieruchomości.
the shadow
Owszem, natomiast moim zdaniem my w
side
Europie
effects
mamy
that, for
taką
example, prices for
niesamowitą
residential
tendencję do
buildings
chęci
are
regulacji
rising.
wszystkiego. Moim
We
zdaniem
have
to jest
this
jedno z
wish to
naszych systemowych,
regulate
strukturalnych
everything,
wyzwań,
and
na
it is
przykład
a
do którego
structural
inaczej podchodzą
challenge.
Anglosasi czy wiele miejsc
In
w Azji.
Anglo-Saxon culture or in Asia, they have a different approach. When we look at the history of Łódź,
Warszawy,
history
czy
of
historię
Warsaw,
każdego miasta, które
history
w jakimś
of
swoim etapie
any
miało
city
okres dużej świetności,
that had its
była w
ups
ogromnej
and
mierze
downs.
spontaniczna eksplozja
There
jakiegoś
was a
wielkiego sukcesu, jakiejś
spontaneous
wielkiej energii,
explosion of huge
która
energy,
spowodowała, że ludzie
of
gdzieś
a
chcieli być.
success
Łodzi
that
był ten
people
boom
wanted to live
przemysłowy,
here.
tak jak
In
kiedyś na
Łódź
Dzikim
it was
Zachodzie,
the
jak
textile
Kalifornia,
industry, like in
Gold Rush, że ludzie
gold
widzieli
rush
tutaj
in California,
ogromne szanse, które
that
nie widzieli
people
gdzie
saw
indziej.
that there were
To stoi za
chances
sukcesem
in
Nowego
Łódź.
Jorku.
New York
Że kiedyś
City,
tam
for
zjeżdżali
example.
ludzie z całego globu, od wschodu do
People
zachodu,
from
bo
East and
to
West
był ich percepcji,
wanted to
ich
come to
umysłach,
New
the
York
land
because
of
it was the
opportunities,
land
miejsce,
of
gdzie można złapać
opportunities,
marzenia.
where
Moim
your
zdaniem
dreams will come
wiele
true.
rzeczy czy koncepcji, czy
So
jak
a
często
lot of
jeżdżę na różne
concepts,
zloty
and I
prezydentów
take
miast z
part
Europy,
in
z
different
Urbanistów,
meetings
dzielam się,
of people, mayors from different cities, and they discuss 70% of green areas, tourism not more than 4.5% during 1 week, and so on and so forth. It's not the right approach, in my opinion.
Owszem, są pewne procesy, które
Of
czasami
course,
się
there are
wymykają spod
certain
kontroli,
processes
ale
that
nie
are
tylko
not
dlatego, że jestem
under
liberałem z
control.
przekonania, co
I'm
w wielu
a
wypadkach dzisiaj
liberal,
nie należy do komplementu.
which is
Uważam,
not
że one w
a
pewnym sensie
good
muszą się
idea.
samoregulować.
Sometimes
I
I
sobie
believe in
wyobraźmy na przykład
self-regulation.
która miała
Barcelona,
bardzo
for
głośne
example.
protesty mieszkańców
There were
względem
protests against
Z całym
over-tourism.
szacunkiem do Hiszpanii, z całym szacunkiem
I
do Katalonii, z całym szacunkiem do
respect
Barcelony.
Catalonia, Barcelona,
Wyobraźmy
and
sobie,
Spain. Just
żebyśmy
imagine
zrobili tak i
that we
usunęli
do it
turystykę z tego miasta.
and to just
Ja kocham Barcelonę,
kill
jestem
tourism. I
przynajmniej
love
raz do
Barcelona.
roku.
At least
Wyobrażam
once a
sobie,
year
żeby
I
tę
travel
gałąź
there. If you
gospodarki,
cut off
funkcjonowania
this
tam
branch
usunąć,
of the
to
economy
miasto się
in
zawali
Barcelona,
gospodarstwa.
it
Pod
will
każdym
be
możliwym
like
względem.
house cards,
Przynajmniej w
house
formie,
of
w
cards
jakiej
that
dotychczas je
will
znamy.
just fall apart. At least Barcelona as we
Uważam, że
know
w
it
ogóle w
now.
dyskusji o miastach, o
I believe
zrównoważonym
that when we
rozwoju,
discuss sustainable development and development of cities, we are hostages of our own ideas, and they dominate certain debates. Challenges, there is a huge challenge, we haven't overcome it. This is a barrier, a hurdle, related to the thesis by Artur Urbański. We haven't managed to create strong enough magnet that attracts people to live in Łódź. That's why we are working on it. That's why we have €1 billion into revitalization. That's why we organize such an event as today. It's not only to renovate the buildings, but to do it in a systemic way so that people want to live here and build their lives here. Can I react to that?
Zgadzam się po części.
I partially agree with the previous speaker when we mention sustainable development for Krakow, and as a resident of Krakow, I feel responsible for that, and I have experience in service design and innovations and design focused on human demands and needs. We try to be creative in problem solving. And I do realize that without first checking the data, including statistical data, if we don't create the map of our reality in a reliable way, based on real data, and then we are innovative using our imagination, but also reliable data. And as a city outpace research is going to be used, it is a new method in Poland in terms of research.
Bez tego jakby trudno nam będzie właśnie wyjść z tego
It would be
zakleszczenia tych
difficult
wszystkich
to overcome these
sformalizowanych już
problems
wizji tego, czym powinien być
because
zrównoważony
there is this
rozwój.
formal approach to
I,
sustainable development,
dlatego
which is
chciałam dostać
widespread.
adwokatem,
So
bo
I wanted
to
to
jest
react
proces, który
to
bardzo świadomie
Adam's
właśnie
words
otworzyć
because we have to be
umysły ludzi na te
conscious
nowe
and
rozwiązania, na
open
styku,
imagination,
nowych danych,
using
nowej
new
wiedzy o
data,
własnym
new
mieście,
knowledge
też jako
about
miasto
our
z
own
tradycjami
city.
żyjemy z
We
przekonaniami
have
o
a
swoim
city
mieście.
with
I ciężko jest
traditions
nam
and we
nawet już
have
wymyślać
certain
te dobre
attitudes,
rozwiązania i
and
łączyć
we are
tą
not
kreatywność,
innovative,
która
not
spowoduje, że
creative
jednak konsekwencje
in
naszego
finding
działania
new solutions
codziennego, naszej pracy, na przykład w
because
sektorze
our
kultury, przestaną
everyday
być aż
work
takie negatywne.
cannot bring negative consequences if we have a different approach. Charles, taking into account what Karolina and Adam mentioned, what are your reflections in a broader context outside Łódź or Krakow, and what are your observations about other European cities?
I mean, I feel that obviously in some cities there is so much tourism that it is really very difficult. So I'm always saying, okay, is there an opportunity in the problem? And so let's start with Łódź and Artur Urbanski's thing. What is your reason for being? You've lost it. So presumably the big question is, what is our new reason for being?
We've lost it 35 years ago, but we regained it, but not at the scale that would fully satisfy me. To be
okay.
fully precise.
All right, okay. The only point I'm making is that you then, presumably over the last 35 years, have been trying to ensure that you have a reason for being. What are the elements that you need in a place to make that okay? Clearly, education, high-level education, is one of the key factors. Two, the livability quotient, if I can call it that, how livable is the place, how vibrant, etc., etc. A third thing is price. I think price is an incredibly important thing. I believe the price in Warsaw is much higher per square meter than here, so that is an opportunity to a certain point, and then suddenly the price goes up. So just adding all of these things together, then one says, well, what are the resources? And now, historically, in some other cities, you know, people have said, what were the former skills we had in these industries that have declined? Is there a modern way of adapting them? Now, that is increasingly difficult. So we're back to what are the specialisms within the third and higher educational levels? Now, clearly, presumably, I don't know the details of the film school, but it looked pretty big, the film school, as I drove past it. I'm hoping that one is getting beyond film as film, that one is perhaps looking at art and science together with technology. Do you see what I mean? I feel there's a cluster of things that if they were really tightly put together, and there are so many innovations happening in that, I would feel that's one thing that not enough cities, by the way, are making those connections. The other thing I would say is, you know, lots of these things are not cliches, but they're used a lot, is the circular economy. Now, there are just so many options of doing things differently. Are there specialisms that Łódź can create, that it is a leader in some of these things? And that's the question I would be asking myself. I think the physical conditions of Łódź, in my limited experience, are broadly very good. I mean, most cities are pretty horrible. Sorry, not most. I mean, Krakow. No, but many cities... No, sorry, I don't mean it like that. Many cities are not as nice as they would like to be. They are pretty difficult to move around and all of that. And I think, and I'm not trying to flatter Łódź, why should I? But there are relatively good conditions here. weaknesses, you know, connectivity is a weakness, clearly. So I would then focus on these resource things, the weaknesses. I think connectivity, if you could persuade someone beyond Ryanair to arrive here, that would make a real, given my 17-hour travel yesterday, I'm really convinced of that. So I would make this overall asset audit of Łódź. Now, when I did this work with cities roughly the size of Łódź for an American foundation about why do some cities that have the same resources as others do better, we came to a simple slogan. They said, it's not okay to be okay. They derived energy from that. They orchestrated the assets that they had. They really did this stuff. They didn't just use the word bringing. They saw that city making is a collective endeavor, which requires the collective imagination of a number of people, all with all the conflicts involved. And that's why I do admire a city I really quite admire, which is smaller than you, but is doing unbelievably well, is the third city of Portugal, which is Braga. You know, I mean, the amount of jobs they're creating and the amount of, like Bosch has put one of its strategic think tanks in Braga. Why? Partly because they've had some really interesting ideas. They've got courses on, just look them up and then you'll see that they're doing interesting things. So there are examples. Leiden is another example, Leiden in the Netherlands. A third example, I'm going into the north now, Oulu and Tartu, both are projecting themselves in terms of the outside world, obviously using high tech, as test beds. So in some senses, not being the capital is often a real advantage. Historically, cities that did well, I mean, Glasgow 300 years ago did very well because it wasn't London, if you see what I mean. There's not so much of a spotlight. So sometimes being the experimentation zone for someone else's problems is useful. Now, that's not necessarily generating millions of jobs, but when you orchestrate all these small elements together through time, you possibly find at least you're moving forward rather than going backwards. My God, you ask such difficult questions, Karolina.
Przepraszam.
I mean...
Well, I apologize.
Świetnie ci idzie.
But you're doing great.
Oh my God, you're another flatterer. Anyway, off you go.
Zacząłeś mówić o
Well,
trendach.
you mentioned trends, so something that helped certain cities, something characteristic of certain cities, and I would like to focus on that. In Krakow festival office, you created an observatory, which is an interdisciplinary, intersectoral unit. What do you get from this observatory? What trends can you share with us? Please tell us a little bit about that. Well, this observatory is based on a method of work that we developed in order to be able to offer some space for the projections that Charles mentioned. And that is for the sector of culture as a whole, not just in Krakow, but in Poland more generally. And the concept is that we conduct a lot of research, qualitative, quantitative, and then we overlap it with different trends and benchmarks. And we compare them, and we focus on specific subjects of interest. This year, we focused on free time. Well, what free time is and what it should be in the future, and how we want to experience it in the future, and how the society treats their free time, these were the subjects of interest. So we would like to develop a prototype of different forms of spending free time in the future by the inhabitants of Krakow. And we are now testing and consulting it with the residents, and We want their feedback on different ideas. We want to know how good match there is. And on the basis of that, we create certain recommendations for the sector of culture to be able to recommend some solutions. And during that study, we developed a prototype of what we call persona wesoła. And actually, people like to think about cities with a psychological perspective. So a city could have a human version, a human avatar. And actually, we realized that Wesoła space, Wesoła is a district in Krakow, for those of you who don't know. So people who got engaged in this study, Wesoła could be a creature, a non-human creature that they could build relationship with, that they could invest their free time in, and they could actually spend free time on developing public space. So our studies take into account different trends, and those trends that matter, that are significant, are positive on one hand. So for instance, some trends show there is hope, and that people like to spend their free time not just on entertainment, but they like to have this sense of agency, and they like to have influence on their environment and their circle, and they like to acquire new skills and competencies. But some things are less optimistic, and we need to take that into account as well. For instance, the well-being is deteriorating, especially the mental health of young people. And we try to look at how culture influences their confidence, their satisfaction with the space and where they live, and their attitude to the world. So these are also things that we take into account as part of our work in the Observatory of Culture. Wow, it sounds quite interesting. Are your reports available to the public? Well, we will do that in November. We have two reports from our studies. So the report about free time, and there is one crazy prototype that we described, one that I like very much, is a social space mission. I recommend reading about this prototype. And another study that we did was about mapping experience of cultural tourists in Krakow, which is a user journey. Anybody can use that to see what the process of, what the experience is of people who are interested in culture in our city and who consciously interact with culture. And that will also be made available in November, and we'll continue to do that in the future. Thank you. Okay, so we started, we can now go from prototyping and planning to a question that I have to the mayor. And so what are the, not trends, but priorities that result from the latest strategy for Łódź, and which ones are the most important?
Ostatnia strategia
Well, the latest
była w pewnym sensie nazwaniem czegoś, co już robiliśmy wcześniej, tylko nie mieliśmy tego opisanego jako strategia. Więc ta strategia miała bardziej funkcję systematyzacji czegoś, co już się dzieje. I akurat jestem bardzo dumny, i to bynajmniej nie z siebie, ale bardziej z mojej
And that is something I'm very proud of. It's not my achievement, but it's something that my former colleagues were able to achieve. In the city structure, because my colleagues, they were wise enough to understand that time flies, tactics change, but they wanted to be consistent in their actions. So Marek Janiak deserves gratitude because he was able to resist temptations resulting from ideology or certain new trends friends, and he did not go off the course. He kept the course going of something that is, I believe, very good. So this strategy had a very effective name of a co-creative city. And in many discussions, this is treated as discovering the promised land. But actually, what a co-created city is inviting people into the decision-making process. That's it. And, okay, it has different names, different terms, social participation, social consultations, and so on. Here, luckily, from the very beginning of many years of our administrative work, to the extent that it was possible, we did that. Well, I want to add that participation is not just cascading responsibility to others. It's not about doing a referendum about any minor thing. It's not about avoiding or evading decision-making. It's about taking better decisions due to having an attentive ear to what your residents are saying. It's natural. Authorities, whether local or regional, if they believe they're omnipotent and they have only top-down decisions, like a bomb from the sky. These are by nature flawed decisions. Good decisions are never just one person's job. It's a collective effort. It was even said mentioned by a Nobel Prize winner. So it's not a revelation. And the person that I'm referring to, the Nobel Prize winner, I believe it was somebody who cooperated with somebody who was competing with a Polish woman, and that was not Maria Curie-Skłodowska, but it was many years ago. So that person was asked by a journalist, why did you get a Nobel Prize? Were you the wisest from among the group? And this man with a southern accent, like an early Bill Clinton, he said, absolutely not. So why did you get this Nobel Prize? And he said, my competitor was 1,000,000 times wiser than me. She was a true genius. So the journalist says, so how come you did get the prize? Because I had a group of people who were wiser than me, and I asked every single one of them for opinion. It seems such a cliche, but that's true. Sometimes you have to take a decision which may be controversial. I have a few such decisions on my account, no regrets. But a co-created city is something that has been done here over a long period of time. So asking people for opinion, it's just a better process of taking decisions. And the second strategy, which is related and is something I'm very proud of.
This is the strategy about building the central hub of our city. I'm often associated with it, but it was not my idea. I was not that competent to do that. Professor Marek Janiek introduced this name and this concept, and we are just going forward, and we believe that these are two pillars of the strategy, and we shouldn't change that no matter what happens. Thank you very much for this idea about co-creation, that you co-create something together. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so collectively let us sum up this discussion, although there were a lot of topics raised, and we could dwell on that for hours. Charles, one sentence, maybe two sentences to sum up.
One sentence for me. There is always a niche that one can find. Find a deep niche and find 3 or 4, and that attracts certain people. And rather than having a massive platform, and I think once you do this analysis of the audit, I'm sure you've done it already, by the way, but just really focusing on some deep niches where you have the main event, you are the one who's associated with it. So you capture the imagination of the world in terms of those specific things. I just think there are so many of these niches there.
Thank you. Karolina, 2 słowa podsumowania.
Karolina,
Trudno coś podsumować, ale
it's difficult to
ale
add to
myślę,
what
że,
Charles mentioned.
Niewątpliwie kreatywne miasto to
Creative
jest,
cities.
dobrze
This is
zorchestrowany
about
potencjał,
well orchestrated
de facto,
potential
wszystkich
of
mieszkańców
everyone
danego miasta,
involved
żeby
in the
dobrze
life of this
zorchestrować ten
city,
potencjał,
of the residents.
trzeba dobrze
In order
znać
to
to miasto,
use
więc
this
jest
potential, you
miasto,
have to
które
know the city very
nieskończenie
well.
cały czas musimy się
So we have to
uczyć
learn
i uczyć
about
tego
this city
potencjału,
all
po to,
the
żeby
time
rzeczywiście móc,
and discover
właśnie
its
tą
potential all the
kreatywność
time
zorkiestrować
in order to
na rzecz
orchestrate this
wszystkich, żeby
potential,
efektywny
this
ten
creativity
efekt
for the
ko-kreacji
benefit
miasta,
of
który
residents,
jest
and that's why
bardzo
it is a co-creation. And I like this idea. Adam, 2 sentences.
One sentence to you. Just, Charles, don't get me wrong. We're doing quite well. We're doing quite good, but we just could be doing better, in my opinion.
Said you were doing badly.
No,
My tone was supposed to be positive and generous and all of that.
I just wanted to clarify. To make it crystal clear. A jeśli chodzi o tą kreatywność, która jest tym
Speaking of creativity,
naszej dzisiejszej
which is a
dyskusji,
leitmotiv of our discussion,
miasto czy miejsce,
I believe that this is the city which has an idea for itself, and there is the intellectual and systemic lack of fear to
chcemy się pozycjonować. Moim zdaniem czasem nam to
overcome
wychodzi.
some difficulties, and
Czasami
sometimes we are
potykamy się
more
o własne
successful,
nogi,
sometimes
ale
we are less
w ogólnym
successful.
rozrachunku
But
uważam,
in
że
general,
w pewnym
let me
sensie ta
say
idea czy ten
that this
przymiotnik nie jest pustym
idea,
sloganem, tylko faktycznie
co-creative
jest dla
and
nas jedną z
creative
inspiracji,
is
albo
one of
jednym
the
z fundamentów
inspirations,
tego,
one of the
jakimi chcemy być.
pillars for what we want to be. Thank you very much, and I would like to summarize saying creative cities shall be in touch with each other, shall learn from each other's experiences, and shall support each other, and use the expert opinion of specialists. And we were happy to have an expert with us. So a round of applause for Charles. Thank you for visiting us.
Dziękuję bardzo Karolinie.
Thank you, Karolina,
dyrektorce
director
Krakowskiego Biura
of the
Festiwalowego.
Krakow Festival Office, and Adam Pustelnik, Deputy Mayor of the City of
Dziękujemy
Łódź.
za udział w
Thank you,
dyskusji,
dear
w
audience,
naszym
for
spotkaniu.
participation in our meeting. Thank you.
Jedzą kanapki z kawiorem.
Nadzwyczajna kasa.
Obrażanie dziennikarz telewizji polskiej.
Chodzi o działania polityczne.
Ratowanie ofiar dla pedofilów.
Für Deutschland.
TVP Info. Włącz się na nowo.
Radość, nadzieja, życie, wyzwanie, pasja, pamięć, zaufanie, pokój, jedność. Słowa tworzą świat. Polskie Radio. Źródło wiarygodnych informacji.
Plany biznesowe powstają z marzeń. Dlatego nie ma 2 takich samych firm. Jedni chcą działać na całym świecie. Innym cały świat mieści się w dłoni. Sukces biznesu to nie tylko jego wielkość, ale też szczęście, jakie przynosi ludziom. PKO Bank Polski.
Uwielbiam szycie w sieci. Wczoraj podszyłem się pod wnuczka, wieczorem uszyłem intrygę na apce randkowej, a dziś planuję grubymi nićmi szyte oszustwo z promocją. Tak się szyje.
Na oszustów są sposoby. Zapoznaj się z poradami ekspertów na niedajsiepodszyć.pl.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Polskie Radio.
Jedynka.
Rodzina spółek Pelion to 12 000 osób pracujących w ponad 300 spółkach w Polsce, Szwecji, Wielkiej Brytanii i na Litwie. Jesteśmy liderem w branży ochrony zdrowia. Od 1990 roku dbamy o długość i jakość życia. Pracować z nami możesz w jednym z 7 obszarów.
Dziś Nowy Jork, jutro Londyn. Za chwilę Paryż, Warszawa, Berlin. Na całym świecie kultura pulsuje rytmem. Wystarczy tylko włączyć dwójkę. Dwójka, Polskie Radio. Jesteś na miejscu.
Zapraszamy do Trójki. Od nowa.
Trójka. Program Trzeci Polskiego Radia.
wytrzymasz klockowe tortury ze stoickim spokojem? Czy w twardych negocjacjach zachowasz zimną krew? Czy poddasz się dobrowolnej eksmisji ze swojego łóżka? Brawo! Test na obecność serca zaliczony. To znaczy, że ty też możesz być rodzicem zastępczym. Dowiedz się jak na testserca.pl.